Assalamu alaikum and good greetings. So today I'll be watching a video by Infidel Noodle titled "The Greatest Threat to Islam?" question mark. I think this will be the first video of this channel that I watch, but I'm interested to know what is the greatest threat to Islam according to the person. So without further ado, let's watch.
In the age of the internet, there are so many different threats that are being posed to Islam. For example, ex-Muslims who decide to speak up and share their thoughts and stories. There's also the more obvious ones, like the fact that people are now able to point out logical and scientific inconsistencies and spread this to a wider audience. But I think there's another threat that we don't talk about nearly enough. How often do we hear the phrase, Islam is the fastest growing religion. Alhamdulillah, so many people are embracing Islam. But when people speak about this rapid increase, they never follow it up with the facts. So often they fail to mention the fact that Islam's growth is actually relying on one particular thing: birth rates. To put it simply, statistics are showing us that Muslim women have higher fertility rates in comparison to non-Muslim women. We see this reflected in data provided by Pew Research Center, which demonstrates that this is the case on a global scale. If we look at a more localized...
That is interesting. So globally, Christians' fertility rate is not that much lower than Muslim. Interesting. Because from I remember watching some videos where some Christians are, especially Christians in America, is pointing their finger to Christians in Europe for not, reproduce enough as compared to the Muslim, right? But this statistic is interesting, right? This is worldwide, right? So if worldwide 3.1 and 2.7, is that significant? Because in terms of just looking at the number, it doesn't seem that too far. But perhaps if you multiply by the billion of people, the number might be significant. But I always imagine something larger, because this one is, I think, meaning that one family produced 3 children. Is that what this number means? Meaning in Muslim, average 3.1 children, Christian 2.7 children. Because if that is the case, average is almost 3 as well, right? It's not like if you look at the left side, for example, Buddhist 1.6 that says, or unaffiliated 1.7. Interesting. I have never looked at this kind of statistics before.
Research Center, which demonstrates that this is the case on a global scale. If we look at a more localized example like Australia, we can also see that our census data is reflecting and substantiating the same thing.
Okay, so Islam and Christian. Okay, interesting. So that one is the global. So Christian is 2.7 if I remember correctly, but now it's 2.1. So I guess the higher fertility rate of Christianity, is it from the US? Or is it from the Latin America part? That's interesting. Because I believe in Australia or in Europe, I think in Europe it will be much less for Christianity. So which continent which is boosting it up to 2.7? That is interesting to see.
So ultimately, what we know from this is that Islam's growth is relying on one particular group: women. In the West...
Okay, the conclusion making here is interesting. I do not reject the notion that the population of Muslim worldwide is expanding much because of fertility rate. That's a given. That's understood. But it does not in itself reject the conversion rate, unless you have the total and then you minus and then you see the rest is insignificant. Then you can see that that's the only factor, right?
Islam relies very heavily upon Muslim women to entice non-Muslim women to consider and embrace Islam. And of course, once that happens, those same women are then encouraged to go looking for a Muslim husband. We can see this reflected in real-life examples of former converts who are now ex-Muslims. After speaking with I learnt about how when she became a Muslim, she was constantly faced with the pressure of finding a husband, settling down, and fulfilling her role as a good Muslim woman. Also explained to me that this went as far as her dropping out of college after finding a husband just so that she could have Muslim children. And
Okay, this is this representative of anything? I do not reject any particular story. If because someone feels certain things and they share their story, I will take it as face value. But is it representative as that's the Muslim culture that you are conditioned in that way that stop studying, your place is to breed? Is that happening? In what country is that happening? I'm not sure. Perhaps because in my region, even though Malaysia is Muslim majority country, the majority of my friends have their wife working, right? So of course that doesn't stop us from having children, but I'm saying that the connotation that is being mentioned here is somewhat to the extreme.
And fulfill the role of a wife. We see very similar things in cases like Deborah's story. What I'm hearing from both of these women is that the one thing that really, really drew them into Islam and made them want to stay was other women. Their kindness, their generosity, their relatability, and the way that they were able to paint Islam as something that women would love. So once again, we're seeing the exact same trend here. Islam relying on women to secure its growth. If you grew up a Muslim woman like me, I want to ask you this. How many of you were told that you couldn't move out of home, couldn't travel overseas, or do anything of the sort without a mahram? Now, if you had male siblings, how did your freedom compare to theirs? Growing up in a Western country, I recognized that I had the privilege of secular freedoms to assist me in that department. As we see in places like Saudi Arabia, the requirement for a mahram is even reflected within legislation itself, taking that degree of control to a whole different level. Muslim women are taught that we need a mahram.
Wait, taking an example from Saudi Arabia, which is not representative because it's not where the majority of Muslim is at, right? That's quite interesting. Although I do understand worldwide there's a certain image that we associate, but because to begin with she takes statistics, etc., right? Facts and figures, but now
we need that caretaker, that protector, that person who has that degree of responsibility over us. Islam places women in a position where we are forced to become reliant upon men. Be honest with me. How many of you who are or were a Muslim at one point thought to yourself, I need to find a husband so that I can be free? I know that there was certainly a long period of time in my life where I was thinking like that. As many of us are aware, verse 434 clearly describes the requirement for women to be obedient wives. We are even told that we can be subject to physical discipline if we don't fulfill this obligation.
now, when she highlighted that there's instruction in the Quran for a woman to be obedient wife, is that in itself a negative connotation? I'm wondering, because is it like, what? In Islam you have to be an obedient wife and instead of being not obedient? Meaning I'm trying to understand what's unless, of course, if you already have a preconceived notion that all Muslim men are dictator-like person that is driven by negative whatever, then obviously paired with that you have to be obedient regardless, even if your husband is evil, then I can understand why that is bad. But if you read the Quran before it talks about the woman, it talks about the husband's responsibility, etc., right? So if you take Islam in itself, then when you reach why when a woman is instructed to be obedient to the husband, you already understand the husband should be in this character. So there's no problem there. I'm not as well, because this is a bit a lengthy discussion if we are digging into the real issues in the society, where I do understand there are lousy Muslim guys that are not Islamic in their behavior, and being a husband, a lousy husband, etc., 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 right? So I do not say that those kind of guys do not exist. They are not representing Islam, because their behavior is not representing Islam. So, but I do understand those issues do become fitnah to Islam.
In other words, the Quran itself is enabling and justifying gendered domestic violence.
What? So we just mentioned about that, right? So the logic here, I was hopeful because she started with facts and figures, things like that, and then suddenly the conclusion making is going downhill, where just taking a verse that says a wife should obey or obedient to the husband does not imply that her husband can abuse the wife. In fact, that is exactly and specifically prohibited in the Quran itself. So I'm not sure whether those kind of verse is hard to find, even though it's just before it goes to the wife, it's settled with the husband, right? But is it very hard to find for those who are making these points?
Then, of course, this is further substantiated within the Hadith. For example, we see that Muhammad himself explained that a man will not be asked why he beat his wife. We see
Great da'if. Okay, so at least she put the whole caption so we can see, okay, this is a da'if hadith.
Himself explained that a man will not be asked why he beat his wife. We see Aisha herself remarking on the battered and bruised body of a fellow Muslim believer. We see Aisha explaining that she has never seen anyone suffering as much as the believing women. Now, of course,
is that taken in the proper context?
Dawa boys will tell us that even though the Quran explicitly explains that we are to receive half the inheritance of a man, this is in fact good for us, and Islam treats us like queens. They tell us that a man is responsible for caring and looking after his wife and children, while a woman's money remains her own. Of course, what they conveniently exclude is the fact that this depiction of men as caretakers does nothing but maintain archaic heteronormative values and roles. In reality, what this is actually doing is undermining the ability of a woman to prosper and thrive independently. This degrades the capability of women as independent human beings and places unnecessary strain on men. The sexism and misogyny in this notion is so blatant. Muslim apologists will try to tell us that because men are required to provide women with a dowry in exchange for marriage, this explains the immense value of a woman. Truthfully and realistically, what the concept of a dowry actually does is make an attempt to quantify our worth as women, our worth as human beings. This depicts
what she's saying here. Of course, she's entitled to her opinion, right? But there's a lot to if you unpacked a lot of this allegation, it will be a long video. We'll have to have a specific video on that. But let's see what's other points.
us as property, as an item that can be exchanged for gifts or money. Islam
What? Seriously? Because I'm pondering, would any of this, because I'm trying to see what she's saying from the perspective of anyone who understands Islam, and then trying to see if those who are not familiar with Islam hearing this, I can see it it becomes a polarizing thing, because those who can see through what she is saying, then it's obvious what I'm talking about. But those are the other group of people will see what she is saying and then have some examples, or unfortunately those guys that we're talking about earlier, and feel that, you know, this is a justified statement. It's a tricky thing when, as long as this is from Muslim perspective, and I'm talking to Muslim primarily here, as long as there are lousy Muslim, non-practicing Muslim amongst the Muslim, personally, that's why I rarely become so passionate to answer this kind of question, because we can answer based on the Quran and the Sunnah, obviously, because Islam states otherwise from this allegation. But we know that there are some Muslim guys that is like those allegation, and until we you know, correct those guys, there will be people that will still look at that and feel what they thought about Islam is justified, even though we can bring to the primary source, but you know, people still judge based on what they see. And same here.
Islam wants to pretend that women are something upon which you can place a price tag, when in reality we are priceless. When we look at the concept of marriage, in addition to the fact that we can only marry Muslim men, there's also the issue that Muslim men can take 4 wives, whereas we are only permitted to have 1 husband.
So is the objection here that she wished that women are allowed to have multiple husbands? Is that the issue? And is that a solution to anything?
Within that marriage itself, Islam wants to pretend that we are fields, something upon which men can put forth their righteousness however and whenever they please.
I can understand those who read that verse that is not familiar with you know, how farmer treat the land, how, you know, those who depend on the farm treat their land. You can have that kind of conclusion, you know. That's interesting, because certain things have a certain context, and those who understand the context can clearly understand what it means. But those who I don't know, what do you think farmers, or you know, those who depend on their land, on their farm, how do they treat their land? What do you think? What is the conception towards them? They just do whatever they want to the land, or is that what you think, you know, farmers do?
Islam tells us that if we deny our husbands the sexual gratification, that we will be cursed by the malaika, the angels. Islam even goes so far as to say that our silence equates to our consent.
We were once dependent, and we became independent.
How can we even say that by the malaika, the angels? Islam even goes so far as to say that our silence equates to our consent.
Now, that is in a specific case of marriage, right? And that's the discussion about that in terms of those who are I do understand, from if you are raised up in the westernized society where everyone do not have, you know, shyness, etc. So it's hard to understand that context, that when they are too shy to speak up, it means something. Because if it's, you know, how to say yes in that shyness is much more difficult in comparison to when they do not like it, they will say no, right? So
how can we even pretend that Islam isn't paving the way to marital rape? There's also the fact that Islam teaches us to shield our bodies away from the world. Islam teaches us that we are awra, that we are fitna. People will try to argue that Islamic modesty standards and requirement for hijab are also enforced upon men, but of course they'll conveniently exclude the fact that the degree to which men are expected to cover pales in comparison to the expectations enforced upon women. Islam tries to pretend that this is a way to...
So is her argument is that women should be allowed to expose the same level as men? Is that the... I do understand this is, an emotive... it can trigger certain emotion for some people. What is missing until now is all the verses about the responsibility of the male, right?
Prevent us from being sexualized and abused. Islamic apologists will tell us that we can be compared to wrapped and unwrapped candy, that we are jewels which need to be shielded in layers of fabric. All this done under the disguise of modesty. And of course, they conveniently fail to mention the incredibly high rates of sexual assault occurring in Muslim countries where women are covering. As we know, this even includes the holy city of Mecca itself. Apologists will brush...
So what has this have anything to do with Islam? Those committing crime in Islam suddenly is... what's the point here?
Over the implications of purity culture in practice, they will make no mention of the fact that this paves the way, justifies and substantiates rape culture and victim blaming. Islam tells us that women can never be successful leaders. Islam degrades our intelligence. It depicts periods as dirty and impure. It tells us that we are ungrateful. We are evil omens that can be compared to animals and property. Islam very clearly articulates that the majority of women are destined for hell. The fact of the matter...
The majority of women?
We are evil omens that can be compared to animals and property. Islam very clearly articulates that the majority of women are...
Faza'ammatun man dakhalaha an-nisa. It's not majority of women go to hell, right? Can you differentiate between stating that and what is stated in the hadith? I think if you even read the English translation, you can see how this is different than what she said.
Are destined for hell. The fact of the matter is this: Islam is a religion created by men for men. There were no female prophets in Islam. The Quran itself...
Now, some of this I do understand. It trying to poke at the woman to feel something, right? But if you go each of the points and you scrutinize it, what's your argument? If Islam elevates the level of woman, meaning that some of the prophet should be female, is that the point? Right, so why and why? I'm not arguing that it must be male or it must be female, but when God gives certain responsibilities suitable for the creation, that based on the ultimate knowledge of God of what is suitable, etc. So how do we... I'm not sure whether she actually left religion altogether or still left Islam to go to other religion, but some of these points maybe is easier to understand if she comes from rejecting God altogether. Then it can be understood why many of these points are being made.
Largely fails to even speak to women directly. To all my Muslim and ex-Muslim sisters around the world, I want you to know this: the author of the Quran may have failed to even bother speaking to you directly, but today I'm here to speak specifically to you. As I hope you can see, Islam relies on our obedience, our oppression, our submission. You deserve more than a religion that seeks to degrade and control every aspect of your life as a female.
That's interesting. As a Muslim, regardless of male or female, right? Basically, Islam means full submission and surrender to the will of God, to the commandment of God. So when we talk about our whole life is being quote unquote controlled. That is applicable to both male and female, right? So I think that points, because it's a concluding remark, I think almost it will be like it can affect you if you're already affected by many of the things that is being mentioned, right? Emotionally.
You deserve more than to have your freedom restricted and dictated by the sexual perversions of a dead 7th century man. In the face of our autonomy, our empowerment, and our liberation, Islam quivers with fear. There are dour boys out there who will try desperately to emotionally manipulate you and guilt trip you into conforming. They will try to threaten and intimidate you should you dare to dissent. Should you dare to take off your hijab, make your own choices, and step out of the carefully curated box that is Islam.
Okay, several things. If you want to go out from obeying the commandment of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, that's one thing, right? And when you mix that with male oppressing female, even from the seerah, the time of Rasul sallallahu alaihi wasallam, the Sahaba, the role of female, if you go there, because some of the allegation is going back there as if it is painting a picture as if Islam, if what is being said here is true, then for sure Islam is oppressing women back then. But if you look at the seerah, right, how the woman function in society, even in battle, it's hard to justify any of those allegations, really, especially when you talk about Islamically, right, not culturally in that region. It's unfortunate though that some of the cultural thing that is not really in line with Islam actually survive until this day, and from outside those are being made similar to Islamic teaching. So unfortunate.
These men so desperately want to fight for maintaining an ideology that gives them a sense of authority they otherwise would not possess. Don't let them. You and you alone are the only person who speaks for yourself. And just as these dour boys shed tears in the face of our liberation, so too will Islam. If we stand in solidarity to support each other's liberation, we are stronger than any patriarchal ideology out there that seeks to control us. We need to support each other's right to disbelieve, to dissent, to make our own choices, to live our lives according to no one's terms and conditions except our own. So to all the women out there around the world who are watching this, hear me loud and clear when I say that the greatest threat to Islam today, right now, is you.
Alright, so that's the end of the video. Now, the remark about our right to disbelieve, etc., right? Now, if we are discussing about because that's a real issue here, right? With respect to, for example, those there are those male and female that really believe in God and really believe that God sent messenger and really believe that Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam is the messenger. So that's quite a clear-cut case, right? So normally in that there's no such issue that is being raised here. Unfortunately, there are within the Muslim community, male and female, that do not really believe any of those. Either there's God, or really believe that God, if they already believe God, really believe that God sent messenger and really have the desire to follow what the messenger said, right? So if those components are lacking, meaning that they do not really have intention to submit to God, then what she mentioned becomes a valid discussion, because when that happened to male, that a male that officially is a Muslim, but mindset wise, belief wise, not so much, they can misuse Islamic teaching for their gain. They can justify, I'm the husband, I'm the powerful one, and whatever, and they can disguise their misconduct under the name of Islam, which is not a valid, meaning that they are going against Islam, but it's easier for male to misuse certain aspect of Islamic teaching for their own, desire or whatever. But for female, it's much more difficult. I do agree with that point, meaning that for a male that is officially a Muslim but not so much in terms of the belief and the desire to submit to God, and female that also do not have that belief and desire to submit to God, this female will feel much more, because they are being closed by either the husband, etc., from going to disbelief, right? That tend to happen. And for Muslim that is in that category, they can misuse, in the label of Islam, the so-called authority as a husband, as a father, etc., for their own whims. So in that discourse, I do understand what she's saying, because I cannot deny that unfortunately we have such a failure in terms of educating, because many Muslim worldwide are brought up as a Muslim, more of a culture rather than we discuss and dig into what is the reason we really believe that this whole thing is being created, and how do we find the creator, what is the proof, how to evaluate this teaching until we reach the conclusion, right, to become firmly strongly believe in the truth. If you do not have those things and suddenly you are being asked just to conform, it's not it's not weird that all this kind of discourse comes into the picture, right? Because they do not believe in the first place, they do not believe in God, or they do not want to submit to God in the first place. Hence they will feel exactly like what she mentioned in this video. I will not deny that. So that's why the issue comes to the core. What do you believe? If you believe in God, do you want to submit to God? And why? And why not? Is it safe not wanting to submit to God if you actually already believe that God exists? Right? So those kind of discussion, the fundamental discussion, I think, is the thing that really need to be resolved among the Muslim Ummah nowadays. Because otherwise, the Muslim guys that is not really wanting to submit to God, but they can use or misuse, in the name of Islam, their wife, their children, whatever the position that they have, right? Because Islam do give certain responsibilities to men, that within that responsibilities, obviously there's Allah will ask, how do you being responsible for that task, right? But for those who are not fear of the punishment in hell, they just misuse all of those. Unfortunately, that happened. Unfortunately, so much. Unfortunately, and for the female, they are not in the condition to misuse anything, just like the male. Hence, this discourse, right? Yeah, that's my comment. I know that I'm exposing some of the discourse within the Muslim. We know these issues of what happening, not with the Islamic teaching itself, but with the human, with the so-called Muslim. We know this is happening, but as long as we do not really deal with all these issues and resolve it, personally, this is personal, I'm not sure how much we can explain to the outsiders. We can explain the teachings, but those guys are still become the proof that counter the teaching itself. So there's a lot of work to be done for any Muslims watching here to really correct the Ummah and let's strive and figure this out, right? Inshallah. Until then, thank you for watching. See you next time.